hope you're actually watching and hearing this. This is take 3 of RecAd Savvy, the webcast about all things recruitment, advertising, and marketing. My name is Peter Weddle. I'm the founder and CEO of TAtech, and I'm very pleased to welcome my guest today, Mikhil, the founder and CEO of SonicJobs. Mikhil, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter, for having me. And I see some really amazing people in the crowd. So as we go through the session, Roy, Stephen Rothberg, Chris, Robin Stadler, please, feel free to kind of have a voice and on the chat.
And there's good reason that they should join us in, because we're talking about a very important topic in online recruitment advertising today, Gen AI's impact on apply fraud and spam. And Mikhil's view is that it's a new wave. So we're going to dive in on that topic. But first, Mikhil, tell us a little bit about yourself and SonicJobs.
Yeah, so the problem that we solve is that when candidates apply for a job today, they're redirected for every application that they make. And particularly now that 70% of candidates are applying for their job on mobile, candidates are not doing this. So today, Appcast report this year, 2023, only 4% of people that click on a job end up completing the application. And so that means 96% of budgets that are being spent on clicks are being wasted, and 96% of the time the candidate is wasting their time. And so that's the problem that we solve. We've created AI automation technology so that candidates can apply for any job on site, and that's particularly the case with mobile.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So if you have a pulse, you know that generative AI has become a huge factor in all of our lives and every aspect of our lives, but especially for our audience in talent acquisition. But the problem of scams in job search and talent acquisition is not a new one at all. In fact, SHRM, for example, reported that the US Business Bureau reported that they tracked 3,000 recruiting scams in just the first 10 months alone of 2018, and that those scams cost individuals and companies a lot of money. So, Mikhil, what's different about what's going on today?
By the way, it's really important to mention, Peter, what you've just said, which is that actually we've had click fraud for a long time. I think what's different today is that we're seeing apply fraud, and we actually need to define what that is exactly, because is that a candidate? Obviously, I mean, I think everyone can agree, like apply, what's known now as apply farms, where people are just taking LinkedIn profiles and applying without the candidate even knowing. That quite easy to say that's fraud, and kind of I think the definition is going to get is something that actually is going to evolve. If someone, there's now tools, again, if you attended kind of Stephen's podcast yesterday with on CV Wallet with Richard Collins, there's tools where people can pay for that, which Richard talked about as well, which you pay $100 a month and someone the AI applies for 100 jobs every 2 days or something like that for you. Is that fraud? Yes or no? There's systems that can improve your resume, improve your cover letter, but then you click the apply button. Is that fraud? Yes or no? Again, I think it's. I certainly through the course of this podcast, I'm not going to claim that I have all the answers. I think it's just interesting to ask the question: what do we think of as fraud? I think one of the key tenets of fraud is intent. And so I think we need to come back to intent. And one of the key, I'll come back to it kind of more and more, the way we think about it, one of the key ways to kind of counteract that, or to start to make way in this new wave is what we think of as transparency, or actually seeing the application. I'll come back to that point again and again. But I think the reason this is a new wave is we're talking about apply fraud, and most job platforms today can't see their applications because the applicant is redirected. And so I think there's more systems and processes that we need to have in place to counteract this new wave.
So I think you were talking about Stephen O'Donnell's stepping up interview yesterday with Richard Collins, the CEO of CD Wallet. And he did explore in some detail the fact that, job seekers can, with reckless abandon, using AI, apply to literally hundreds, even thousands of jobs, whether they're qualified or not. In your view, is that apply fraud?
I think we think of it as good friction and bad friction. So kind of, I would say there's not enough good friction in a situation where a candidate can apply for hundreds or thousands of jobs through the AI without the intent to apply. I think there's probably a word that's not quite fraud because they've paid for this service. So I guess it's not fraud, but I don't think it serves the purpose of what the employer wants. I don't think it serves the right balance between the two. And again, Richard talked about it, which was he talked about how the fact that employers have had tools for many years in terms of kind of spreading their jobs everywhere, and making themselves look fantastic, all that sort of stuff. Finally, you've got kind of job seekers who have these tools now. And I see it a little bit as I do think we're at a little bit of a peak at the moment. I'm an optimist. I do think we'll find a balance over the next months, years, because I think the reason that job seekers are using these tools is a little bit of a rebel vote. It's a little bit of, you've treated us badly for the last how many ever years. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use these tools, and we're just going to, you've spammed us, now we're going to spam you. And, job seekers have been spammed for years. If you look at a mailbox of a job seeker applying for, 5 jobs across 5 different job platforms, they'll get hundreds of emails and spammed all over the place, and their data will go everywhere. And so I think this is a rebel vote using these tools. I think we'll find a balance. And I guess there's some core principles to finding that balance, which I can touch on. But I think about it more from that angle rather than kind of necessarily we have the solution or the answers today. I don't think anyone does. I don't think we should necessarily go crazy in solutionizing. I think we should go actually up to the principles and start to figure out what is fraud, its intent. Okay, how can we counteract that? And kind of go down to the principles level.
So, in part at least, this is a revolt against the resume black hole situation that job seekers have complained about for years. If the notion is if my resume is going into a black hole, why not send it into every black hole I possibly can with the hope that somebody will pay attention. But let's talk about those principles that you mentioned. What in particular are you talking about there?
Yeah, so I think for job platforms, I think they need, and we've done a ton of work at Sonic to build out our whole systems. Need to, and I think that's true for now. Everyone needs to be able to see their applications. You'll be amazed at the number of job platforms today that can't tell you whether the applicant was good or not. And that is something that we can't have moving forward, because there's too much variance in a good application and a bad application. And bad we can define as fraud or scammy or whatever you want to call it. And so at Sonic, and this is not easy to define, by the way. There's we've also had a few conversations with, for example, Tom, who's the head of product at Appcast, around kind of how we might solve this as an ecosystem. And there's not easy answers. There's obvious fraud, which is like the candidate's email is different to the one that they applied for, or that they're not a good fit. Again, that kind of apply farms. But actually, it's not easy to spot fraud as a job platform. But before we come to that step, it's actually it's important to first recognize that most people can't even see that. So, if you're a standard job platform today, you're just redirecting the candidate, and that means you can't even see into your applications, which means that you can't see the variance and start to build rules around that. The second thing, which I think is important when I think about principles, and I was touching on that, is reputation is going to have a really important part in the solution. And what I mean by that is reputation for the candidate. So the solution that we're going to have to find is going to be a kind of a solution that sits across multiple job platforms, and that means that if someone as a candidate kind of misbehaves, I think there's going to have a reputation impact across kind of the ecosystem. And I think, Richard talked about trust and kind of having maybe a trusted marketplace, which I think makes sense. But if we think about, hundreds of millions of job seekers just in Europe and the US alone, if not, and you've got kind of billions of people all over the world, I think about it more in terms of how financial, the fintechs or finance regulates itself. If you do fintech or finance fraud, you're in a system that, kind of regulates that so that you can't do more in the future. And I think whether you call that reputation or trust or kind of a collaboration, all of those things are kind of going to be important principles, as is, I think first and foremost, is going to have to be transparency to actually see the applications. Otherwise, we're just sitting here in the dark. And a lot of the evidence right now is kind of anecdotal evidence, which we need to turn into actual data that we can use and utilize.
Okay, so we've talked a fair amount, and justifiably so, about job seeker behavior and its impact on our space. But when you use the term fraud, and you parsed it earlier, you have to also think about the bad guys, and synthetic realities, synthetic identities, those kinds of things. Are you seeing that problem grow as well in the space?
That has increased. I honestly think that that's a much easier problem to solve, because I think you can identify the bad players and kind of take them out of the ecosystem quite quickly. So I actually think that's, the apply farms. By the way, we've all seen it, where every job site in the industry has had, an experience of that on their own platform or seen it on other platforms. And that is increasing. When all of the work we've done suggests that is 0.1% of the problem. That doesn't mean it's not important. Again, if you scale that up, that's a lot of applications. So I'm not saying that it's not a problem. It's just not. We haven't seen it yet impactful enough to kind of change our whole ecosystem. I actually think the middle ground, which is these tools where job seekers are actively using, a more interesting discussion, at least, because I think, and Roy in the chat kind of made the point, around one-click applies, and we've had one-click applies, Indeed Easy Applies, If Easy Apply, that sort of stuff. Sonic, we call that a hosted apply, but you answer all of the questions. And again, we think a lot about kind of this good friction, bad friction point. I think what we're seeing now is that one step further. How do we feel about someone paying for a zero-click apply? That's, I think, a more I think that's a question that remains unanswered for me, or for our ecosystem. I think we can all agree the apply farms and how to kind of take that away. But the zero-click applies where someone pays for. I'd actually be curious in the chat for those people who have an opinion. Would you consider that fraud? I think there's one thing to say that the employer wouldn't pay for it. I think that's fair as well. Employers don't want to pay for applies that are automated. That's fair, and not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, do we think there's intent there, given that the candidate or the user has paid for the service and the service is making the application, or do we think that is fraud? And yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I don't know that we have to get locked into a debate about the term. It's whether it's fraud or not, it's definitely a problem, because as you just pointed out, employers, want to pay for qualified applicants or genuine applications as opposed to those that are not. Not that they're necessarily malicious, they're just not worth spending time on. And the one thing recruiting teams don't have is time. So fair enough. So that this is a complicated issue for the employer and the job board, to be sure. But let's turn it around and also look at it from the job seeker's perspective. Gen AI has clearly had an impact there. I saw a report from SIFT, which is a fraud prevention company, that found that account takeover attempts, we've all been subject to those, but with the arrival of Gen AI, they have jumped a huge amount. According to SIFT, 354% year over year in just Q2 of this year. And in some areas, you mentioned fintech, for example, particularly hard hit, an increase of 808% increase in account takeover attempts. So the job seeker, is also dealing with this much more powerful technology.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think I think that's a reality that we're going to see. I mean, we're obviously talking about recruitment here, but Gen AI can do a lot of things that will scam people in multiple industries, and as people, we will get targeted. You can make a call and have a voice of someone else. You can have Tom Cruise's voice and kind of make a call. And I think we're at the start of that journey. I do think some of the regulations that will come in place will, over time, again, I don't know if it's going to capture everything all at one go, but over time, help us balance this. And I think across industries, that's going to be really important.
Well, speaking of regulations, the Biden White House just issued their executive order on AI. It was pretty sweeping, but the one area that I don't believe it addressed was the fraud and scam problem. So as you look in your crystal ball, and none of our crystal balls are perfect, but fair enough. As you look in your crystal ball, where do you think we're going to go with this thing over the next 12 to 14 months? And is there any hope of any genuine remediation for this problem?
I think, by the way, it's not just apply fraud. We're going to see like interview fraud, where a person can pretend to be an engineer even if they're not, and all the answers come to them. Even in the actual interview, we're going to kind of see kind of fraud there, because you're going to be able to answer questions or be able to do tasks in a way that the AI tells you what to do. So I think that's going to be a real challenge. In terms of a solution, I think, I mean, Roy touches on it in the chat as well. I think there's going to be two solutions that come into play. One is every job platform is going to have to get more aware of the applications that they're delivering. And, some of the media agencies, programmatic, again, Appcast might do that themselves, and Appcast do that themselves. In addition to that, the job platforms are going to need to do that. It's going to have to be a combined effort to be able to deliver a good applicant to the employer, because there'll be things that the media agency or programmatic agency don't see that the job platform do in terms of IPs and clicks and that sort of stuff. And that delivery is going to be really important. I think the second thing is moving to a kind of qualified application model in some way. I think that is going to, we talk about CPA. I mean, Indeed CPA, which Indeed's always the reference point in terms of where the market is as a whole. Indeed CPA is not really a CPA. It's an applied start before the candidate goes on the ATS or the career site. I think we need to move to that CPA model, and then I think we'll need to move to a qualified applicant model shortly after that. And I think this will accelerate that and that move in business model.
Interesting. Chris Walk has just raised a topic that I had not thought about. And I think it is potentially something that deserves more attention. And that is that let's assume for a moment that there's no ill intention behind, you mentioned intention, there's no ill intention about someone paying to have these applications made on their behalf, whether we like it or not. But not everybody can afford to do that. So his question is, do those tools create a class of job seekers that has a competitive advantage in the job market? And is that fair? Is that the kind of thing that we want to see? Our industry ending up with job seekers who don't all have a level playing field?
Yeah, and I think about this. And this question, by the way, Chris, thanks for raising it. It's a really important question, because you can look at it in different angles. You've got the payment side of things. So, are you kind of making people who can pay do better? But some of these tools also genuinely help people. And so, we talk about, they can apply for thousands of jobs. But, we see one of the biggest, we've done a bunch of psychological kind of interviews with job seekers, and we continuously do them. And fear of failure is the primary reason why someone doesn't apply for a job. And so you've got one kind of the psychological aspect of fear of failure of applying for that job, that the dark hole, you never hear back. You've also then got stuff like dyslexia, or you've got stuff like not being able to write up the CV, and so having a tool do that for you is a much cheaper option than a CV or a resume writer, and all that sort of stuff. These tools are much more cost effective. So there's a tendency that we can look at all of these tools as bad. I think right now we might have the kind of wave of tools that maybe are exaggerating the impact that they want to make, but maybe there's a balance where actually they can serve a subset of job seekers that would otherwise struggle, and that's a really important consideration as we think about the solutions to all of this.
Okay. We did start a little late, so we're going to go over a couple more minutes. And these sessions are always too short. We're obviously just scratching the surface of what is a complex issue. But what steps do you think, to come back to the core principles that you mentioned, what steps should a job board or a programmatic platform be taking to make sure that Gen AI, I mean, obviously that technology can be helpful. Most of the more advanced products that we have in the marketplace today use it in some way, shape, or form. But how can we make sure that it is not in some ways screwing up the business model, the monetary model on which our businesses are based?
I'll talk about what we're doing, which is, I don't want to necessarily preach to everyone, but what we're doing is improving our visibility of each application that's delivered to a client. And so we know exactly what data is being delivered, and we're able to create smart rules around when they're flagged as potentially fraud. And I think, and we're just kind of, over the last 6 months, we've been working diligently and quite comprehensively to create a set of rules that identify what is fraud, what's not fraud. And again, I can tell you from our experience, there's not a single factor like this one thing. I mean, there is for like the real outliers, as I talked about, but the things in the middle are actually quite hard to identify. You're looking at multivariate analysis on the data. And that, I think, is what we think of as step number one. Once you can see the data and look at it, before it goes to your client, I think that's really important. And I think the industry as a whole, if I think about the industry as a job platform industry, will have to do more and more of that. I think we haven't yet got to the stage where we collaborate with each other. That will have to happen. But I think the first step is transparency, which is what we're super focused on right now.
Do you think the customer understands and appreciates that effort? I understand that their bottom line metric is going to be, I don't want to be swamped with a lot of useless resumes. I just want to look at qualified applicants. They've been saying that for years. It's a pretty less than rigorous test, because they often don't have a good definition of what they think quality is. But let's move beyond that. How do you talk to customers about this topic? Because they are aware of the terms, click fraud and apply fraud, and sometimes they get concerned about it. So how do you talk to them in a way that they can understand what you're doing for transparency, what you're doing in trying to make sure that the data are clean and that you're handing off, the best qualified candidates you can get for them?
It's a really good question. I think, in some ways, a lot of the media agencies that we work with track down funnel. Again, Roy talked about that in the chat as well from Outcast. And what we're aiming for is that you kind of filter out the stuff that's not applicable, particularly the fraud stuff. Again, we don't want to be in a position where we're stopping applications that are genuine applications. We don't want to play God and we don't want to play recruiter, because we are neither as a job platform. And so, but you can filter out the stuff that's obviously bad in order to deliver better candidates, and so that down funnel your percentages are higher in terms of allocating budget to you, and being able to be a trusted partner of the kind of agencies. I think there's not an obvious, we take the hit on a lot of candidates that come to us. We could charge for that and we don't. Most of our almost entirely we sell on a cost per apply basis. So if we don't make that application, we don't get paid as a platform. We think about that as, you know, a short-term hit to make a better relationship in the medium and long term. And I think that is, I don't know if there's a language yet or enough transparency yet where we can start to monetize that. Can you charge more for that? Can you charge a higher CPA for that because you've got these rules in place? We haven't yet got to that stage, and I also think we're still building and kind of understanding our capabilities on that in a deeper way in order to be able to kind of go out there and monetize in a slightly different way. So I wouldn't say we're there yet at all. In fact, I'm not sure anyone is. So yeah, we're still at the process of kind of trying to get to grips with how this wave is moving, which is, I would say, the first 2 steps.
Well, Mikhil, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank all of you who've commented in the thread to helping to make this what for me was a very educational, and I hope for you, a very educational and engaging conversation. We're going to be carrying on with some of the same individuals at TAtech Europe and the EMEA Job Board Forum coming up in London on December 4th through 6th. So I hope that you all will join us at that conference. This is clearly a topic important to the success of our industry, and we very much appreciate all of you being here and hope you'll come back for the next episode of RecAd Savvy, the webcast about all things recruitment, advertising, and marketing. Thanks very much, everyone. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Bye.